Hi everybody in Abnormal Psychology, Psych 266. Today's chapter and topic, Cognitive Disorders. Chapter 16 in your book, page 474 if you're following along. In the book, like I would highly recommend, cognitive disorders means there is something wrong with your brain's functioning. Plain and simple. But of course it gets a lot more complicated than that. I am going to try to keep it as simple as possible, I promise. So, we're going to talk about major and mild cognitive, or better known as neurocognitive disorders. That has mostly to do with the magnitude of the impairment. How bad is it, basically? So we're going to get into that in a little bit. First of all, cognition, the mental processing of information. But of course it does get more complicated than that. We're talking about how information comes into your brain, how you keep it there, how you use it, how you make sense of it, your memory, all kinds of things like that. Now, one thing that we do as psychologists, you can easily Google this, medical doctors do this too, a mental status exam. Some of those questions on such an exam involve short-term memory. Other ones, long-term memory. Other questions are about awareness. Sometimes a question will be following instructions, or maybe with a delayed period of time to see if you can remember what I told you 30 seconds ago. Mental status exam. You get a score on that, and it tells you the level of impairment, assuming that the person was trying and being honest in the first place. So, first disorder we're going to talk about, delirium. You've heard of somebody being delirious? That can have multiple meanings. But in the cognitive deficit world, what it means is a reduction in or lack of awareness and attention. The two A's, awareness and attention. That is delirium. But what it also means is that there's another cognitive deficit, not just your attention span and your awareness. It could be a whole bunch of things. Are you oriented? Do you know where you are and why you're there? Your memory, short and long term, your ability to understand language and use language, your perception of things. Do you understand what you're seeing or hearing? So you add any of those factors to the two A words, which is awareness and attention, and you have delirium. Delirium usually starts quickly and ends quickly. One of the most common reasons is the anesthesia that people get put under for surgery. Typically that's based on body weight, so therefore if a person is elderly or cognitively impaired already, anesthesia can affect them tremendously. So delirium usually starts quickly and ends quickly. So we're going to talk about some of the symptoms you notice, not just in delirium, but in cognitive disorders in general. Problems with language. In delirium, this can mean a million things, and we can't go over them all in a short video like this. However, person might have rambling speech. It might be hard for them to get words out of their mouth in the first place. That's almost the opposite of rambling speech. Disjointed, like their sentences don't flow, they don't make sense. Incoherent, like even the words don't make sense that they're using, even if they're not in a specific order for them to make sense in the first place. Something we call derailing, going from one topic to another. Language impairments can mean a bunch of things. Also in delirium, but also in other cognitive disorders, sleep-wake cycle problems. A person might have vivid dreams and nightmares. They might not be able to sleep and then sleep for many hours in a row. Everything is off from what it should be. Again, delirium usually begins suddenly and ends suddenly, but another thing I want you to know, and again, this is shared with other cognitive disorders too, it's called sundowning. If we were in class together, I would ask if anybody knows what this means, and usually people do. People will tell me, oh yeah, that's when you get worse the longer that the day goes. And that's exactly right. We see that with Alzheimer's, delirium, all kinds of cognitive disorders. People are usually better when they first wake up than as the day goes on. Almost like physical fatigue and tiredness, your brain gets that way too. Now I'm picking up my book here because I'm going to skip all the way to 488. 488. So back to that topic, major and mild cognitive disorders. How much is it impairing the person's life? There's also a concept called pre-morbid. What did you used to be like? If someone was a junior high school dropout and now I test them after their brain injury and that person has 7th grade skills, that's not much of a decline. But if somebody had a PhD or an MD and now they have junior high school level skills, that's a major problem. So we want to know, is it a major problem or a minor problem, but also how much deterioration is there? So here's a little math problem for you, and it's not a hard one. Your attention span and your processing capability is called working memory. You know how your computer has hard drive, but also working memory, RAM? It's the same thing. How many programs can you have open on your computer at once? That's the working memory. The hard drive storage space is a different kind of memory altogether. Well, the human brain is like that as well. Now, we have a lot of kinds of memory. I don't want you to memorize all these for the test. We don't even have time in the video to go over all of them. But 2 I want you to know, other than working memory, which we just discussed. Episodic memory. Do you remember things that happened in your life? Episodes of your life? Episodic. And semantic memory, your memory of knowledge and information. Pretend you're on Jeopardy. Well, you need to know things, not your own life experience. You need to know information. When people get a cognitive impairment, it's usually an episodic memory problem. They don't remember things that have happened to them, maybe even things 5 minutes ago, or maybe things years ago. They usually don't forget their semantic memory, knowledge of information. Like, who was George Washington? I don't know, I wasn't there. Well, my semantic memory will tell me, oh, he was the first president of the United States, because that is just information I have memorized. It's not part of my episodes of my life. Moving right along. I want you to know a couple of different disorders. Unfortunately, they start with A. It makes it a little tougher. We've used that letter a lot today with first words, attention, awareness. Well, here is some disorders that I want you to know. One of them, agnosia. Dr. Oliver Sacks, he wrote a book years ago called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Strange title, don't you think? Well, what Oliver Sacks meant by that was, this man could see just fine, he couldn't make sense of what he could see. Agnosia, that can be a very strange disorder. Somebody could look at a rose and describe the colors and the texture and the smell, but not be able to know what it is. Agnosia. Apraxia is a little less severe, and that is when your brain can't tell your hands or your feet what to do. They can't tell them commands. Your extremities, I should say, don't understand the commands from your brain. So that's apraxia. I might hold a pen in my hand or a comb or a brush, and my brain just can't tell my hands what to do with it. It could be the same with a person's inability to walk. And the other A term I want you to know that has to do with motor ability and perception, this is on page 490 and 491, that would be aphasia. That is more of a speech-related issue, however. Fluent aphasia, people do say things, it's just what they say makes no sense. Whereas non-fluent aphasia, it takes forever, it seems, to get a word or two out. That happens often when someone has a stroke. That's the most common reason. whereas agnosia, it's often a brain tumor. And apraxia that we just went over, often that's a disruption to a brain's functioning, a person's brain's functioning. So that's what I want you to know. Now, when someone's language is impaired with aphasia or any other condition, we want to know, is it receptive or expressive? Receptive means they don't understand what other people are saying to them. That's their problem. Whereas expressive, they can't get the words out of their mouth to form a sentence or part of a meaningful conversation. Now, the difference between major and minor, or the more severe and less severe of any of these brain injuries, is the amount of decline, what we call premorbid functioning, like I was just talking to you about moments ago. If you're following in the book, I'm skipping to page 498 and then to 516. Two more conditions that I want you to know before we conclude the lesson for this chapter. First of all, 498, Alzheimer's disease. Here's what I want you to know. There is such thing as early Alzheimer's. By the way, this is usually quicker onset, and it usually becomes more severe more quickly when someone has Alzheimer's in their 50s or 60s or even their 40s sometimes. That's pretty scary. But once you reach your 80s, it's pretty common that you have symptoms of Alzheimer's. You forget, you become disoriented, you repeat yourself, you can't form connections between concepts and ideas, you might become reclusive, combative verbally and physically. Usually in class I have students that have some knowledge of this from experience with relatives or jobs or even things they've seen on TV. I want you to know this for the exam. When you're in your 80s, it's almost expected that you're going to have symptoms of Alzheimer's. However, a person with Down syndrome, cut that number in half. It's when they're in their 40s that we start seeing these symptoms. Just so you know, Alzheimer's. What happens in the brain when somebody gets Alzheimer's? Plaque builds up. If plaque builds on your teeth, you brush your teeth. Plaque builds in your arteries, there's interventions that can be done, but in your brain, there is no undoing it or treating the plaque. Also, neurons tangle around each other. I don't know if you can see my visual. Do you remember from Psych 101 how neurons didn't actually touch? There's a little space in between. That's called a synapse. And that's good. Brain chemicals go from one neuron to the next. However, can you imagine neurons tangling around each other? How could that brain chemical possibly go from one to the next? It can't. And then neurons die very quickly too. So the combination of the plaque buildup, which eats away at them, the tangling, and the dying of neurons, not a good thing. That's why people have Alzheimer's symptoms that results in death eventually, because the brain deteriorates. It really does. Now, there are 3 steps to Alzheimer's, and there's no telling how long it will take for someone to go through these 3 steps. The first one is growing forgetfulness. I think a lot of us feel like we have that already. But then the next step is disorientation and a loss of language. That's a bad sign. That usually happens after 3 years or so. But again, there's no telling. Everybody's different. When you start to become disoriented, lose your language skills, don't even remember how to get back home, that is bad. But what's even worse is a loss of self-care. So when elderly people especially stop showering, shaving, combing their hair, putting on clean clothes, using the bathroom, brushing their teeth, on, that is a very bad sign that the deterioration is getting even worse and perhaps more rapid. Even though these stages can take years, they can also occur rather quickly. And by the way, stage 3 is almost always when a person cannot live alone. It'll be dangerous for them. They could starve, they could start a fire, they could walk away and never come back. There's all kinds of reasons not to leave someone alone who is in that 3rd stage. Last thing, vascular dementia. People get this confused with Alzheimer's, but it's really quite different. Rather than a slow onset, it's very rapid. It can happen in a second or two, rather than it taking years. Also, it's almost always due to what we call mini strokes. So, someone with Alzheimer's, a slow decline. And by the way, people with Alzheimer's, they are the last to realize how bad they are. Everyone around them realizes, but they don't see it. People with vascular dementia, not only does it happen very rapidly, but they know. So, if a grandparent perhaps starts to repeat themselves or get confused or disoriented or doesn't know who you are, and it happened very quickly, I would think a stroke, vascular dementia, especially if that elderly person says, "What's wrong with me? How come I'm like this?" Even if they're not questioning you, they're questioning themselves. They know something is wrong and it happened quickly. Vascular dementia, which is different than Alzheimer's. That's a slower progression. The person's unaware. Vascular dementia happens very quickly. The person is aware. So that was chapter 16. The next video will be chapter 17, and the exam is only over those 2 chapters, and that's why it's only a 30-point quiz. The next quiz is going to be over everything. That's the bad news, the final quiz that we'll take, exam number 6. However, there are notes and everything else for you to use to help you do well on it, and it will be you diagnosing cases just like you do for the Canvas assignments. So, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.